Hey everyone, my name is Janine. Just a quick disclaimer that I did test positive for COVID, so my throat is a little sore, you could say. So just bear with me, I'm going to try my best to get through this. Anyways, my underrepresented scientist is Mr. Lloyd Augustus Hall. He was a king. He was a food chemist, and he did a lot of research, and he found out a lot of things about how to preserve food, and it's all stuff that we still use today, so he was super important. Let's get to know him a little bit. So he was born in Line, Illinois in 1894. He ended up dying in 1971 in California, but he'd stayed in the Midwest the majority of his life. In high school, he graduated 10th, top 10 in his class. He was a really good student. He had great grades, obviously. He was captain of the debate team. He played football, baseball. He ran track. He was just overall a great student, super involved, very smart. He ended up going to Northwestern to get his bachelor's degree in pharmaceutical chemistry. I mean, I don't know a single person who has majored in that, so he must be smart. And then after that, he went to the University of Chicago to then get his master's degree in chemistry. So after he graduated, he had a lot of jobs. He moved around a lot. So he started in the Chicago Department of Health as a senior chemist. He then went to the John Merrill Company as a chief chemist there. He was the chief inspector of powder and explosives at the U.S. Ordnance Department. Sounds like a very interesting job. And then the last place before he ended up at the Griffith Laboratory was the Boyer Chemical Laboratory, where he worked as a food chemist. In this last place, the Griffith Laboratories, the founder of that, Carol L. Griffith, was actually a former classmate of Lloyd Hall's in college. They're actually pretty good friends, and she ended up giving him a job as a chief chemist and director of research there. And he stayed there for over 30 years, and that's where a lot of the discoveries he made about preserving food were done there. And that's his most notable job and position. So while he worked at the Griffith Laboratories, he was obviously a food chemist and was studying preserving food. So at that time, food had really just been preserved by table salt. They would literally just slather mainly meat in table salt, hoping to cure it. But he ended up figuring out that he didn't just need sodium to help preserve meat specifically. He also needed nitrogen, so he used chemicals that had like nitrate in it to help cure meat, make it last longer. And he called it either like giving the meat like a shell of nitrogen, or what they now call it as flash drying. So like the most like modern example of this is like beef jerky, or like dried out fruit, things like that. Um, he was able to figure out how to do that and preserve meat in the long run. Um, and then he also looked into how storing meat in containers actually did not work well. So the chemicals that were being added to the meat to help it preserve over time were absorbing the moisture and all the humidity inside these containers with the meat, and the meat would just go bad so fast, and they would notice a film on top of the meat. Um, and he figured out, because he's a chemist, that adding glycerin to the preserving processing chemicals helped get rid of that film on the meat that they were starting to see. And it still absorbed the moisture, but it just didn't result in that nasty bacteria that was starting to grow on meat. Um, he also, if you know what I'm talking about, where you put food in like vacuum sealed bags, he also was the one to kind of like spark that idea, and now it's obviously taken off and is a whole ordeal where you can buy machines to do that with. He was the one that kind of jump started that idea. Ethylene oxide, so that was a gas that he had figured out would help preserve the food and flavor. So while he was doing his research, he discovered that a lot of the seasonings and things that they would add to food for flavor were causing it to go bad way faster. So with this kind of gas, he was able to, again, similar to the meat in the containers thing, get rid of like the nasty bacteria that would grow on top of things like that with this kind of gas. He also published 5 scientific papers. Like I said before, at this laboratory, he was a director of research, so he was very hands-on. He did so much with the way that food is preserved and made today. Just honestly, like the way things are packaged, like at supermarkets, all of that, like, really stemmed from him. He was really the first one to start looking into and actually start caring about how food was packaged, and it ultimately helped with health code laws as well, like making sure food just wasn't going bad super fast. So why was he underrepresented? He sounds like a great guy. He did so much for the way we preserve food. I mean, food is something that we can't live without, so it's really important. And it really just comes down to the fact that he was black. Like I said, while doing research, there was just so much information about everything that he did, and not really why he wasn't, as famous as some other really well-known scientists who were white. This is late 1800s, when he was born. He died in the 70s. Like, the Civil Rights Act, didn't happen for a few years until after, or a few years before he died. There was a few articles that said that he was hired by an electrical company right out of college, and it was actually a phone interview. He got hired, and his first day he walked in and they saw he was black, and they were just calling him racial slurs. So he's had to deal with that. He had to deal with that all of his life, which is really sad. But at the end of the day, he was extremely successful. I mean, he was working for the government. He had jobs. He would move around all the time. He was a scientist for over 40 years. This guy learned so much about food, and it has affected the way that we package things, like I said before, the way we preserve meat. I mean, I have one of those vacuum sealed food equipment things, downstairs in my kitchen. He really did change the entire game for food preservation, and it's really sad that he doesn't get that recognition from the world just because during this time he was black. It is really sad. But yeah, he was overall just a great guy, a great scientist. He did so much. It sucks that he didn't get the recognition that he deserved. Yeah, and those are my works cited. Thank you for watching.